Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, many podcasts put their promotion and cup rattling halfway through or towards the end. But because I'm hoping you're asleep long before we get there, I need to put this stuff up front. This show is brought to you mostly by the help of supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from a lot of people all the time how valuable they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help the show, to keep it going and help me to reach new audiences, are very much appreciated. So if you would like to, and you have the means, please take a look at patron.sleepytimetales.net or hit the link in the show notes, or find it on the website to see what you can get as a supporter. There are real rewards available from as little as $2 a month, over and above the knowledge that you are helping thousands of fellow insomniacs to get a good night's sleep. And other methods of support, also listed in the show notes, if it's a little bit much for you to maybe commit to a monthly contribution, there is a tip jar, there's the merchandise store, and there are others as well. Another huge way you can just help without the show, without having to put your hand in your pockets, is to just simply spread the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. You can find me at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. And thanks for those who do share the show there. This is another way I'd actually like to involve listeners in the show a little bit more. In general, people like the stories that I cover because I choose things that are a little bit unusual and they like how I read them. But if there is something specific you would like to hear, just let me know. Pop me a mail at contact@sleepytimetales.net and I will take a look at what you want me to read for you. It does need to be published before 1923 because then it's public domain. And there are other criteria as well, but I'll take a look at those, but that's the main thing. And something I haven't really mentioned in a while, these are really anxious and troubling times that we live in now, and if you're struggling mentally with stress or anxiety or anything else, try out our partner BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a secure online therapy service from online professionals. I'm not going to go into the long sale, but if you're interested, visit trybetterhelp.com/sleepytime. That's trybetterhelp.com/sleepytime, or take a look on the website to learn more. Sleepy Time Tales listeners get 10% off their first month, and these are trying times, and if you have the means to give yourself a little bit of mental health support, it's probably a very good idea. And of course, last but not least, I have to shout out the music, which is Un Desire Bakumiku. The music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website in the show notes as they've got some very cool stuff that they release under various names that I recommend checking out. And that's it for now. Thank you for taking the time, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But this is the 20th century, and this is the year of 2020, and there are a lot of people getting restless nights, and lack of sleep is a health crisis. And this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning in emotions and turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself just not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. I eventually discovered the tendency for voices, especially droning male ones, to act almost like a tranquilizer for me. I used to go to bed at night and listen to podcasts because I was expecting to lie awake all night. And I'd suddenly find myself waking up having slept through everything that I was trying to listen to. I eventually started listening to those podcasts when I was planning on staying awake, and I found others to listen to specifically to help me sleep. And I eventually discovered that there are podcasts out there that actually are designed for that. People that tell stories or read stories or guide meditations or something like that. And with the aim of hoping that you're asleep by the time you get to the end of it. I tried some out that worked quite well for me, but when I recommended them to others, often there was something about the existing shows that didn't really resonate with people. Often it was the narrator's voice or the topic that they covered or something like that would create an impediment for them to sleep. So I thought to myself, I'm someone with a boring, droning voice, so let me try and see if I can reach some others. And that's how I started up Sleepy Time Tales. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It's here for a couple of reasons, despite the fact that of all the features of the show, it's the thing that gets the most complaints. But it is quite an important part of the show, and I'm going to explain it to you right now. If you're new to the show and the idea of sleep podcasts at all, it is I've got to admit, it's a bit of a strange idea. But it exists here. But I need to explain it to you. I need to explain how to engage with the show. I need to explain the structure of the show. And I need to make a bit of a case for why I think you should listen to it. And people who've been listening to the show for a while, some of them well over a year at this point, for them, this is, it's more than just me explaining the show to them. This is the time where they get ready for bed, maybe brush their teeth, have a drink of water, get their pets settled in or the children settled in, and then have this droning in the background as they get ready and then get into bed. And this is preparation for the actual story to come. If all goes well, I know quite a lot of regular listeners never even hear the story that I tell. They're asleep before I get there, and that is a major success for me. It means that they can listen to it over and over again, and they may never even reach the end of the story because it's always acts as a tranquilizer. Because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build a space together, create new habits to prepare for a good night's sleep. I've completely lost track of where I was, because that is also something that occasionally happens. I will wonder if I've done this over 76 times now as of this episode, and I still lose track of where I am, and that's kind of part of the fun of it. That's also why I re-record this every time, and I don't just use the same thing over and over again, because to me it's more authentic to have it a natural part of the show. Building a space together, Now, as far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to my sleep podcast at night, I need something to focus on. I need a story or a narrative or something interesting that keeps my attention and keeps my mind on something specific to stop it from spinning out into stress anxiety, so that I'm focused just enough not to resist sleep when it comes for me. Now, other people may need something a little bit different, a little bit more primal. In this day and age, white noise is a popular thing as well, or noise generators, or the sound of the ocean, or the sound of rain, or the sound of some dude just droning quietly in the background. Tonight's story, we're returning to The Hillman by E. Phillips Oppenheim. If you haven't heard the first one, it doesn't really matter, because hopefully you're asleep before you get to this one, the end of this one. But the story is about a mysterious young woman who's on a trip from London in a car and has a breakdown. This is early 20th century, so breakdowns are, cars are rare, never mind breakdowns. And she meets a mysterious young man who is a sort of country gentleman, and his mysterious brother who doesn't like women. And she spends the night, and the next morning some interesting things happen. It's a pretty cool story, this. I'm actually really enjoying it. There's the characters are quite interesting and complex, and I think I often say this and I never follow through, but I really am looking forward to carrying on with this story. But whatever the story is, whether it's potential young love or arguments about politics or truth of life or some other actually the story really does go places. What really doesn't matter, the story itself doesn't actually matter. What's important is that you don't try to fall asleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the story and allow it to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it is very important that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. It may take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you. Maybe one episode just isn't long enough. What I do with my sleep podcast as well is I download a whole bunch of each one, and then I start when I'm struggling to sleep or when I go to bed, because I know I'm going to struggle to sleep if I don't do this. I just start with the latest episode, which I've got in a playlist, and I just let them run through the course of the night. Because lately, actually, I don't really struggle to go to sleep. What happens to me is I wake up at 3 a.m. and I struggle to get back to sleep. So I just put my earbuds back in if they've fallen out, and I generally just drift away again. Sometimes I even wake up like 30 minutes or 60 minutes before my alarm goes in the morning. And even then, I still, if the stream is running, I put my earbuds back in and I go straight back to sleep again. You may wonder, what is the point of going back to sleep if you're only going to get another 30 or 60 minutes? And I've got to tell you that sometimes that is the best part of my night. I've even had people email me and thank me for suggesting they do this because it's a common problem. And there's just something about that sleep, that allowing yourself to completely let go right before the alarm, that is deeply, deeply relaxing. I've woken up feeling exhausted at 5 in the morning, and I've woken up feeling absolutely refreshed 60 minutes later at 6 in the morning after what probably was effectively 30 minutes of sleep, and it is fantastic. But however you're engaging with the show, it's very important that you relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you, so I request that you give it a chance. I recommend you give Sleepy Time Tales, or actually any sleep podcast that you try, I recommend you give it a good solid 3 nights of a try just to see if it works for you. Because there is a strangeness to this whole idea, this idea that some strange person that you don't really know is going to be talking to you in your sleep. It is a little bit odd. So there's a natural resistance to it, and I think you need to take some time to learn that you can trust me. I will always look after you, and you'll always be safe with me. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who's elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. As I said, you will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and supposed progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Tonight we return to The Hillman by E. Phillips Oppenheim. Chapter 3. Louise awoke the next morning, filled with a curious sense of buoyant expectancy. The sunshine was pouring into the room, brightening up its most somber corners. It lay across the quilt of her bed and seemed to bring out the perfume of lavender from the pillow on which her head reposed. Aline, hearing her mistress stir, hastened at once to her bedside. "Good morning, madame." Louise sat up and looked around her, with her hands clasped about her knees. "Tell me everything, Aline," she said. "Have you my breakfast there? And what time is it?" "It is 9:30, madame," Aline replied, "and your breakfast is here. The old imbecile from the kitchen has just brought it up." Louise looked approvingly at the breakfast tray with the homemade bread and deep yellow butter, the brown eggs and clear honey. The smell of the coffee was aromatic. She breathed a little sigh of content. "How delicious everything looks," she exclaimed. "The homemade things are well enough in their way, madame," Aline agreed, "but I've never known a household so strange and disagreeable. That Monsieur Jennings who calls himself the butler, he is a person unspeakable, a savage." Louise's eyes twinkled. "I don't think they are fond of women in this household, Aline," she remarked. "Tell me, have you seen Charles?" "Charles has gone to the nearest blacksmith's forge to get something made for the car, madame," Aline replied. "He asked me to say that he was afraid he would not be ready to start before midday." "That does not matter," Louise declared as she settled down to her breakfast. "And I do not care how long it is before he is ready. I should love to spend a month here." Aline held up her hands. She was speechless. Her mistress laughed at her consternation. "Well," she continued, "there is no fear of their asking us for a month, or for an hour longer than they can help. The elder Mr. Strangeway is, it seems, has the strongest objection to our sex. There is not a woman servant in the house, is there?" "Not one, madame," Aline replied. "I have never been in a household conducted in such a manner. It is like the kitchen of a monastery. The terrible Jennings is speechless. If one addresses him, he only mumbles. The sound of my skirts or my footsteps on the stone floor make him shiver. He is worse, one would imagine, than his master." Louise ate and drank reflectively. "It is the queerest household one could possibly stumble upon," she remarked. "The young Mr. Strangeway, he seems different, but he falls in with his brother's ways." Aline glanced at herself in the mirror. She was just out of her mistress's range of vision, and she made a little grimace at her reflection. "I met him twice this morning in the hall," she remarked. "He wished me good morning the first time. The second time he did not speak. He did not seem to see me." Louise finished her breakfast and strolled presently to the window. She gave a little sigh of pleasure as she looked out. "But Aline," she exclaimed, "how exquisite!" The maid glanced over her shoulder and went on preparing her mistress's clothes. "It is as madame finds it," she replied. "For myself, I like the country for fete days and holidays only, and even then I like to find plenty of people there." Louise heard nothing. She was gazing eagerly out of the casement window. Immediately below was a grass-grown orchard which stretched upward at a precipitous angle towards a belt of fresh-ploughed field. Beyond, a little chain of rocky hills, sheer overhead. The trees were pink and white with blossom. The petals lay about upon the ground like drifted snowflakes. Here and there, yellow jonquils were growing among the long grass. A waft of perfume stole into the room through the window which she had opened. "Fill my bath quickly, Aline," Louise ordered. "I must go out. I want to see whether it really is as beautiful as it looks." Aline dressed her mistress in silence. It was not until she had finished lacing her shoes that she spoke another word. Then, suddenly, she stopped short in the act of crossing the room. Her eyes had happened to fall upon the emblazoned genealogical record. A little exclamation escaped her. She swung round toward her mistress, and for once there was animation in her face. "But, madame, I have remembered. The name Strangeway. You see it there? It was in our minds all the time that we had seen or heard it quite lately, don't you remember?" Yes, Louise interrupted. "I know it reminds me of something, but of what?" "Yesterday morning," Aline continued, "it was you, madame, who read it out while you took your coffee. You spoke of the good fortune of some farmer in the north of England to whom a relative in Australia had left a great fortune, hundreds and thousands of pounds. The name was Strangeway, the same as that. I remember it now." She pointed once more to the family tree. Louise sat for a moment with parted lips. "You're quite right, Aline. I remember it all perfectly now. I wonder whether it could possibly be either of these two men." Aline shook her head doubtfully. It would be unbelievable, madame, she decided. Could any sane human creatures live here with no company but the sheep and the cows, if they had money? Money to live in the cities, to buy pleasures, to be happy. Unbelievable, madame. Louise remained standing before the window. She was watching the blossom-laden boughs of one of the apple trees bending and swaying in the fresh morning breeze, watching the restless shadows which came and went upon the grass beneath. "That is just your point of view, Aline," she murmured. "But happiness, well, you would not understand. They are strange men, these two. The young one is different now, but as he grows older, he will be like his brother. He will live a very simple and honorable life. He will be, what is it they call it? A country magistrate, chairman of many things, a judge at agricultural shows. When he dies, he will be buried up in that windy little churchyard, and people will come from a long way off to say how good he was. My hat, quickly, Aline. If I am not in that orchard in 5 minutes, I shall be miserable." Louise found her way without difficulty across a cobbled yard, through a postern gate set in a red brick wall, into the orchard. Very slowly and with her head turned upward towards the trees, she made her way towards the boundary wall. Once, with a little exclamation of pleasure, she drew down a bough of the soft, cool blossom and pressed it against her cheeks. She stopped for a moment or two to examine the contents of a row of chicken coops, and at every few steps she turned around to face the breeze which came sweeping across the moorland from the other side of the house. Arrived at the farther end of the orchard, she came to a gate against which she rested for a moment, leaning her arms upon the topmost bar. Before her was the little belt of ploughed earth, the pungent, fresh odour of which was a new thing to her. A little way to the right, the rolling moorland starred with clumps of gorse. In front, across the field, on the other side of the grey stone wall, the rock-strewn hills. The sky, unusually blue it seemed to her, and dotted all over with masses of fleecy white clouds, seemed somehow lower and nearer. Or was she, perhaps, higher up? She lingered there, absolutely bewildered by the rapid growth in her brain and senses of what surely must be some newly kindled faculty of appreciation. There was a beauty in the world which she had not felt before. She turned her head almost lazily at the sound of a man's voice. A team of horses, straining at the plough, were coming around the bend of the field, and by their side, talking to the labourer who guided them, was John Strangeway. She watched him as he came into sight up the steep rise. Against the empty background, he seemed to lose nothing of the size and strength that had impressed her on the previous night. He was bareheaded, and she noticed for the first time that his closely cropped fair hair was inclined to curl a little near the ears. He walked in step with the ploughman by his side, but without any of the labourer's mechanical plod. With a spring in his footsteps, indeed, as if life and his thoughts were full of joyous things. He was wearing black and white tweed clothes, a little shabby but well-fitting, breeches and gaiters, thick boots, plentifully caked now with mud. He was pointing with his stick along the furrow, so absorbed in the instructions he was giving that he was almost opposite the gate before he was aware of her presence. He promptly abandoned his task and approached her. "Good morning," he called out. She waved her hand. "Good morning. You have slept well?" "Better, I think, than ever before in my life," she answered. "Differently, at any rate, and such an awakening." He looked at her, a little puzzled. The glow upon her face and the sunlight upon her brown hair kept him silent. He was content to look at her and wonder. "Tell me," she demanded impetuously, "is this a little corner of fairyland that you have found? Does the sun always shine like this? Does the earth always smell this sweetly? And are your trees always in blossom? Does your wind always taste as if God had breathed the elixir of life into it?" He turned around to follow the sweep of her eyes. Something of the same glow seemed to rest for a moment upon his face. "It is good," he said, "to find what you love so much appreciated by someone else." They stood together in a silence almost curiously protracted. Then the ploughman passed again with his team of horses, and John called out some instructions to him. She followed him down to earth. "Tell me, Mr. Strangeway," she inquired, "where are your farm buildings?" "Come and I'll show you," he answered, opening the gate to let her through. "Keep close to the hedge until we come to the end of the plough, and then, but no, I won't anticipate. This way." She walked by his side, conscious every now and then of his frankly admiring eyes as he looked down at her. She herself felt all the joy of a woman of the world imbibing a new experience. She did not even glance towards the dismantled motor in the barn which they passed. "I'm glad," he remarked presently, "that you look upon us more charitably than your maid." "Aline is a good girl," Louise said, smiling, "but hot water taps and electric lights are more to her than sunshine and hills. Do you know," she went on, "I feel like a child being led through an undiscovered country, a land of real adventures. Which way are we going, and what are we going to see? Tell me, please." "Wait," he begged. "It is just a queer little corner among the hills, that is all." They reached the end of the ploughed field, and passing through a gate, turned abruptly to the left, and began to climb a narrow path which bordered the boundary wall, and which became steeper every moment. As they ascended, the orchard and the long low house on the other side seemed to lie almost at their feet. The road and the open moorland beyond, stretched to the encircling hills, came more clearly into sight with every backward glance. Louise paused at last, breathless. "I must sit down," she insisted. "It is too beautiful to hurry over." "It is only a few steps further," he told her, holding out his hand. "Just to where the path winds its way down the hill there. But perhaps you are tired." "On the contrary," she assured him. "I never felt so vigorous in my life. All the exercise I take, as a rule, is in Kensington Gardens, and look." She pointed downward to her absurd little shoes and held out her hand. "You will have to help me," she pleaded. The last few steps were indeed almost precipitous. Fragments of rock protruding through the grass and bushes served as steps. John moved on a little ahead and pulled her easily up. Even the slight tightening of his fingers seemed to raise her from her feet. She looked at him wonderingly. "How strong you are." "A matter of weight," he answered, smiling. "You are like a feather. You walk as lightly as the fairies who come out on the Midsummer Night's Eve and dance in circles around the gorse bushes there." Is it the home of the fairies you are taking me to? She asked. If you have discovered that, no wonder you find us ordinary women outside your lives. He laughed. There are no fairies where we are going, he assured her. They were on a rough-made road now, which turned abruptly to the right a few yards ahead, skirting the side of a deep gorge. They took a few steps further, and Louise stopped short with a cry of wonder. Around the abrupt corner, an entirely new perspective was revealed. A little hamlet built on a shoulder of the mountains, and on the right, below a steep descent, a wide and sunny valley. It was like a tiny world of its own, hidden in the bosom of the hills. There was a long line of farm buildings built of grey stone and roofed with red tiles. There were 15 or 20 stacks. A quaint, whitewashed house of considerable size, almost covered on the southward side with creepers. A row of cottages and a grey-walled enclosure, stretching with its white tombstones to the very brink of the descent, in the midst of which was an ancient church, in ruins at the further end, partly rebuilt with the stones of the hillside. Louise looked around her, silent with wonder. A couple of sheepdogs had rushed out from the farmhouse and were fawning around her companion. In the background, a grey-bearded shepherd with Scottish plaid thrown over his shoulders raised his hat. "It isn't real, is it?" she asked, clinging for a moment to John Strangeway's arm. He patted one of the dogs and smiled down at her. "Why not? William Elwick there is a real, very real shepherd, I can assure you. He has sat on these hills for the last 68 years. She looked at the old man almost with awe. "It is like the Bible," she murmured. "Fancy the sunrises he must have seen, and the sunsets, the coming and the fading of the stars, the spring days, the music of the winds in these hollow places booming to him in the night time. I want to talk to him. May I?" He shook his head. The old man was already shambling off. "Better not," he advised. "You would be disappointed, for William has the family weakness. He cannot bear the sight of a woman. You see, he is pretending now that there's something wrong with the hill flock. You asked where the land was that we tilled. Now look. Hold my arm if you feel giddy." She followed the wave of his ash stick. The valley sheer below them and the lower hills on both sides were parcelled out into fields, enclosed within stone walls, reminding her, from the height at which they stood, of nothing so much as the quilt upon her bed. "That's where all our pasture is," he told her, "and our arable land. We grow a great deal of corn in the dip there. All the rest of the hillside and the moorlands, of course, are fit for nothing but grazing, but there are 1,100 acres down there from which we can raise almost anything we choose." Her eyes swept a strange little tract of country backward and forward. She saw men like specks in the fields, the cows grazing in the pasture like toy animals. Then she turned and looked at the neat row of stacks and the square of farm buildings. "I'm trying hard to realize that you're a farmer and that this is your life," she said. He swung open the wooden gate of the churchyard by which they were standing. There was a row of graves on either side of the prim path. "Suppose," he suggested, "you tell me about yourself now, about your own life." The hills parted suddenly as she stood there, looking southward. Through the chasm she seemed to see very clearly the things beyond. Her own life, her own world, spread itself out. A world of easy triumphs, of throbbing emotions always swiftly ministered to, always leaving the same dull sensation of discontent. A world in which the pathways were broad and smooth, but which in the end seemed always the same. A world of receding beauties and mocking desires. The faces of her friends were there, men and women, brilliant, her intellectual compeers, a little tired, offering always the same gifts, the same homage. "My life and the world in which I live seem far away just now," she said quietly. "I think that it is doing me good to have a rest from them. Go on talking to me about yourself, please." He smiled. He was just a little disappointed. We shall very soon reach the end of all that I have to tell you, he remarked. Still, if there's anything you would like to know. Who are these men and women who have lived and died here? She interrupted, with a little wave of her hand toward the graves. All our own people, he told her. Labourers, shepherds, tenant farmers, domestic servants. Our clergyman comes from the village on the other side of that hill. He rides here every Sunday on a pony, which we have to provide for him. She studied the names upon the tombstones, spelling them out slowly. The married people, he went on, are buried on the south side. The single ones and children are nearer the wall. Tell me, he asked after a moment's hesitation, are you married or single? She gave a little start. The abruptness of the question, the keen, steadfast gaze of his compelling eyes, seemed for a moment to paralyze both her nerves and her voice. Again the hills rolled open, but this time it was her own life only that she saw. Her own life and one man's face which she seemed to be looking at from her from some immeasurable distance, waiting yet drawing her closer towards him, closer and closer till their hands met. She was terrified at this unexpected tumult of emotion. It was as if someone had suddenly drawn away one of the stones from which the foundation of her life. She found herself repeating the words on the tombstone facing her. And of Elizabeth, for 61 years the faithful wife and helpmate of Ezra Cummings, mother of his children and his partner in the life everlasting. Her knees began to shake. There was a momentary darkness before her eyes. She felt for the tombstone and sat down. Chapter 4. The churchyard gate was opened and closed noisily. They both glanced up. Stephen Strangeway was coming towards them slowly along the flinty path. Louise, suddenly herself again, rose briskly to her feet. Here comes your brother, she said. I wish he wouldn't glower at me so. I really am not such a terrible person as he seems to think. John muttered a word or two of polite but unconvincing protest. They stood together awaiting his approach. Stephen had apparently lost none of his dourness of the previous night. He was dressed in grey homespun, with knickerbockers and stockings of great thickness. He wore a flannel shirt and collar and a black wisp of a tie. Underneath his battered felt hat, his weather-beaten face seemed longer and grimmer than ever, his mouth more uncompromising. As he looked toward Louise, there was no mistaking the slow dislike in his steely eyes. Your chauffeur, madam, has just returned, he announced. He sent word that he will be ready to start at 1 o'clock. Louise, inspired to battle by the almost provocative hostility of her elder host, smiled sweetly upon him. You can't imagine how sorry I am to hear it, she said. I don't know when, in the whole course of my life, I have met with such a delightful adventure or spent such a perfect morning. Stephen looked at her with level, disapproving eyes, at her slender form in its perfectly fitted tailored gown, at her patent shoes so obviously unsuitable for her surroundings, and at the faint vision of silk stockings. If I might say so without appearing inhospitable, he remarked with faint sarcasm, this would seem to be the fitting moment for your departure. A closer examination of our rough life up here might alter your views. She turned toward John and caught the deprecating glance which flashed from him to Stephen. Your brother is making fun of me, she declared. He looks at me and judges me as just I believe he would judge most people, sternly and without mercy. After all, you know, even though I am a daughter of the cities, there is another point of view. Ours. Can you not believe that the call which prompts men and women to do the things in life which are really worthwhile is heard as often amid the hubbub of the city as in the solitude of these austere hills? The question is a bootless one, Stephen answered firmly. The city calls to its own as a country holds its children, and both do best in their own environment. Like to like, and each bird to his own nest. You would be as much out of place here with us, madame, as my brother and I on the pavements of your city. You may be right, she admitted, yet you dismiss one of the greatest questions in life with a single turn of your tongue. It is given to no one to be infallible. It is even possible that you may be wrong. It is possible, Stephen agreed grimly. The things in life which are worthwhile, she continued, looking down into the valley, are common to all. They do not consist of one thing for one man, another for another. To whom comes the greater share of them, the dweller in the city or you in your primitive and patriarchal life? You rest your brains, you make the seasons feed you. You work enough to keep your muscles firm and nature does the rest. She brings the food to your doors, and when your harvest is over, your work is done. There are possibilities of rust here, Mr. Strangeway. Stephen's smile was almost disdainful. Madam, he declared, you have 6 or 7 million people in London. How many of them live by really creative and honourable work? How many are there of polyglot race, Hebrews, Germans, foreigners of every type, preying upon one another, making false incomes which exist only on paper, living in false luxury, tasting false joys? The signpost of our lives must be our own personal inclinations. Our inclinations, my brother's inclinations and mine, lead us, as they have led my people for hundreds of years, to seek the cleaner things in life and the simpler forms of happiness. If I do not have the pleasure, madam, of seeing you again, permit me to wish you farewell. He turned and walked away. Louise watched him with very real interest. Do you know, she said to Don, there is something which I can only describe as biblical about your brother. Something a little like the prophets of the Old Testament in the way he sees only one issue and clings to it. Are you too of his way of thinking? Up to a certain point, I believe I am, he confessed. I do not think I could ever have lived in the city. I do not think I could ever have been happy in any of the professions. Certainly I could not imagine you as a stockbroker or a lawyer. I find it hard to realize you in any of the ordinary walks of life. Still, you know, the greatest question of all remains unanswered. Are you content just to live and flourish and die? Are there no compelling obligations with which one is born? Do you never feel cramped, in your mind, I mean? Feel that you want your way through the clouds into some other life? I feel nearer the clouds here, he answered simply. I suppose you're sure of content. That is to say, if you can keep free from doubts. Still, there is the fighting instinct, you know, the craving for action. Don't you feel that sometimes? Perhaps, he admitted. They were leaving the churchyard now. She paused abruptly, pointing to a single grave in a part of the churchyard which seemed detached from the rest. Whose grave is that? She inquired. He hesitated. It is the grave of a young girl, he told her quietly. But why is she buried so far off and all alone? Louise persisted. She was the daughter of one of our shepherds, he replied. She went into service at Carlisle and returned here with a child. They are both buried there. Because of that, her grave is apart from the others? Yes, he answered. It is very seldom, I am glad to say, that anything of the sort happens among us. For the second time that morning, Louise was conscious of an unexpected upheaval of emotion. She felt that the sunshine had gone, that the whole sweetness of the place had suddenly passed away. The charm of its simple austerity had perished. And I thought I had found paradise, she cried. She moved quickly from John Strangeway's side. Before she could realize her intention, she had stepped over the low dividing wall and was on her knees by the side of the plain, neglected grave. She tore out the spray of apple blossom which she had thrust into the bosom of her gown and placed it reverently at the head of the little mound. For a moment her eyes drooped and her lips moved. She scarcely knew whether it was in prayer. Then she turned and slowly came back to her companion. Something had gone too from his charm. She saw in him now nothing but the coming dourness of his brother. Her heart was still heavy. She shivered a little. "Come," she said, "let us go back." They commenced a steep descent in silence. Every now and then John held his companion by the arm to steady her somewhat uncertain footsteps. It was he at last who spoke. "Will you tell me, please, what is the matter with you? And why you placed that sprig of apple blossom where you did?" His tone woke her from her lethargy. She was a little surprised at its poignant, almost challenging tone. "Certainly," she said. "I placed it there as a woman's protest against the injustice of that isolation. I deny that it is unjust." She turned around and waved her hand towards the little grey building. "The Saviour to whom your church is dedicated thought otherwise," she reminded him. "Do you play at being lords paramount here over the souls and bodies of your serfs? You judge without knowledge of the facts," he assured her calmly. "The girl could have lived here happily and been married to a respectable young man. She chose instead a wandering life. She chose further to make it a disreputable one. She broke her mother's heart and soured her father's latter years. She brought into the world a nameless child." Louisa's footsteps slackened. "You men," she sighed, "are all alike. You judge only by what happens. You never look inside. And that is why your justice is so different from a woman's. All that you have told me is very pitiful, but there is another view of the case which you should consider. Let us sit down upon this boulder for a few moments. There is something that I should like to say to you before I go." They sat upon a ledge of rock. Below them was the house with its walled garden and its blossom-laden orchard. Beyond stretched the moorland, brilliant with patches of yellow gorse, and the hills blue and melting in the morning sunlight. "Don't you men sometimes realize," she continued earnestly, "the many, many guises in which temptation may come to a woman, especially to a young girl so far from home? She may be very lonely and she may care, and if she cares, it's so hard to refuse the man she loves. The very sweetness, the very generosity of a woman's nature prompts her to give all the time. There are other women, similarly circumstanced, who think only of themselves, of their own safety and happiness, and they escape the danger. But are they to be praised and respected while she that yields is condemned and cast out? I feel that you are not going to agree with me, and I do not wish to argue with you. But what I so passionately object to is the sweeping judgment you make, the sheep on one side and the goats on the other. That is how man judges. God looks further. Every case is different. The law by which one should be judged may be poor justice for another." She glanced at him almost appealingly, but there was no sign of yielding in his face. "Laws," he reminded her, "are made for the benefit of the whole human race. Sometimes an individual may suffer for the benefit of others. That is inevitable." "And so let the subject pass," she concluded, "but it saddens me to think that one of the great sorrows of the world should be there like a monument to spoil the wonder of this morning. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Are you the John Strangeway who has recently had a fortune left to him?" He nodded. "You read about it in the newspapers, I suppose," he said. "Part of the story isn't true. It was stated that I have never seen my Australian uncle, but as a matter of fact he's been over here 3 or 4 times. It was he who paid for my education at Harrow and Oxford." "What did your brother say to that?" "He opposed it," John confessed, "and he hated my uncle. He detests the thought of any one of us going out of sight of our own hills. My uncle had the wander fever." "And you?" she asked. "I have none of it," he asserted. A very faint smile played upon her lips. "Perhaps not before," she murmured. "But now?" "Do you mean because I've inherited the money?" She leaned a little towards him. Her smile now was more evident, and there was something in her eyes which was almost like a challenge. "Naturally." What difference does my money make? He demanded. Don't you realize the increase of your power as a human being? She replied. Don't you realize the larger possibilities of the life that is open to you? You can move, if you will, in the big world. You can take your place in any society you choose, meet interesting people who have done things, learn everything that is new, do everything that is worth doing in life. You can travel to the remote countries of the globe. You can become a politician, a philanthropist, or a sportsman. You can follow your tastes wherever they lead you, and perhaps this is the most important thing of all, you can do everything upon a splendid scale. He smiled down at her. That all sounds very nice, he admitted, but supposing that I have no taste in any of the directions you have mentioned, supposing my life here satisfies me, supposing I find all that I expect to find in life here on my own land among my own hills, what then? She looked at him with a curiosity which was almost passionate. Her lips were parted, her senses strained. It is not possible, she exclaimed, that you can mean it. But why not, he protested. I have not the tortuous brain of the modern politician. I hate cities, the smell of them, the atmosphere of them, the life in them. The desire for travel is only half born in me. That may come, I cannot tell. I love the daily work here. I am fond of horses and dogs. I know every yard of land we own, and I know what it will produce. It interests me to try new experiments, new crops, a new distribution of crops, new machinery sometimes, new methods of fertilizing. I love to watch the seasons come and rain and pass. I love to feel the wind and the sun and even the rain. All these things have become a sort of appetite to me, I'm afraid. He wound up a little lamely that this is all very badly expressed, but the whole truth of it is, you see, that I am a man of simple and inherited tastes. I feel that my life is here, and I live it here, and I love it. Why should I go out like a Don Quixote and search for vague adventures? Because you're a man, she answered swiftly. You have a brain and a soul too big for your life here. You eat and drink and physically you flourish, but part of you sleeps because it is shut away from the world of real things. Don't you sometimes feel it in your very heart that life, as we were meant to live it, can only be lived among your fellow men? He looked upward over his shoulder at the little cluster of farm buildings and cottages and the grey stone church. It seems to me, he declared simply, that the man who tries to live more than one life fails in both. There is a little cycle of life here, among our 30 or 40 souls, which revolves around my brother and myself. You would think it stupid and humdrum, because the people are peasants, but I'm not sure that you're right. The elementary things you know are the greatest, and those we have. Our young people fall in love and marry. The joy of birth comes to our mothers, and the tragedy of death looms over us all. Some go out into the world, and some choose to remain there. A passerby may glance upward from the road at our little hamlet and wonder what can ever happen in such an out-of-the-way corner. I think the answer is just what I've told you. Love and marriage, birth and death happen. These things mark life. Her curiosity now had become merged with an immense interest. She laid her fingers lightly upon his arm. You speak for your people, she said. That is well. I can understand their simple lives being as absorbing to them as ours are to us. I can imagine how, here among your hills, you can watch as a spectator or a cycle of life, which contains, as you have pointed out, every element of tragedy and happiness. But you, yourself? I am one of them, he answered, a necessary part of them. How you deceive yourself. I'm sure you're honest. I'm sure you believe what you say. But will you remember what I'm going to tell you? The time will come before long when you will feel doubts. Doubts about what? She smiled enigmatically. Oh, they will assert themselves, she assured him, and you will recognize them when they come. Something will whisper to you in your heart that, after all, you are not of the same clay as these simple folk, that there is a different mission in the world for a man like you than to play the part of feudal lord over a few peasants. Sooner or later you will come out into the world, and the sooner the better, I think, Mr. John Strangeway. Or you will grow like your brother here among your granite hills. He moved a little uneasily. All the time she was watching him. It seemed to her that she could read the thoughts which were stirring in his brain. "You would like to say, wouldn't you," she went on, "that your brother's is a useful and upright life? So it may be, but it is not wide enough or great enough. No one should be content with the things which he can reach. He should climb a little higher and pick the riper fruit. Some day you will feel the desire to climb. Something will come to you, in the night perhaps, or on the bosom of that wind you love so much. It may be a call of music, or it may be a more martial note. Promise me, will you, that when you feel the impulse, you won't use all that obstinate willpower of yours to crush it. You will destroy the best part of yourself if you do. You will give it a chance. Promise?" She held out her hand with a little impulsive gesture. He took it in his own and held it steadfastly. "I will remember," he promised. Along the narrow streak of road from the southward, they both watched the rapid approach of a large motorcar. There were 2 servants upon the front seat and 1 passenger, a man, inside. It swung into the level stretch beneath them, a fantasy of grey and silver in the reflected sunshine. Louise had been leaning forward, her head supported by her hands as the car slackened speed. She rose very slowly to her feet. "The chariot of deliverance," she muttered. "It is the Prince of Sayre," John remarked, glancing down with a slight frown upon his forehead. She nodded. They had started the descent, and she was walking in a very leisurely fashion. "The Prince is a great friend of mine," she said. "I had promised to spend last night, or at any rate some portion of the evening, at Rainham Castle on my way to London." He summoned up courage to ask her the question which had been on his lips more than once. "As your stay with us is so nearly over, won't you abandon your incognito?" "In the absence of your brother," she answered, "I will risk it. My name is Louise Morel." "Louise Morel, the actress?" he repeated wonderingly. "I am she," Louise confessed. "Would your brother," she added with a little grimace, "feel that he had given me a night's lodging under false pretense?" John made no immediate reply. The world had turned topsy-turvy with him. Louise Morel and a great friend of the Prince of Sayre. He walked on mechanically until she turned and looked at him. "Well?" "I'm sorry," he declared bluntly. "Why?" she asked, a little startled at his candor. "I'm sorry, first of all, that you're a friend with the Prince of Sayre." "And again, why?" "Because of his reputation in these parts." "What does that mean?" she asked. "I'm not a scandalmonger," John replied dryly. "I speak only of what I know. His estates here are systematically neglected. He is the worst landlord in the country and the most unscrupulous. His tenants, both here and in Westmoreland, have to work themselves to death to provide him with the means of living a disreputable life." "Are you not forgetting that the Prince of Sayre is a friend of mine?" she asked stiffly. "I forget nothing," he answered. "You see, up here we have not learned the art of evading the truth." She shrugged her shoulders. "So much for the Prince of Sayre, then. And now why your dislike of my profession?" "That is another matter," he confessed. "You come from a world of which I know nothing. All I can say is that I would rather think of you as something different." She laughed at his somber face and patted his arm lightly. "Big man of the hills," she said, "when you come down from your frozen heights to look for the flowers, I shall try to make you see things differently." And that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us for this reading. The short story is getting rather interesting, I have to say. If you want to carry on without me, you can find it in the link on Project Gutenberg, which you will find in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Deseo by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.